See, I believe that we are the shapers of a new rural, all of us here in this room. And I want to tell you a little bit more in a moment about what I mean by that word, shapers. But I want to tell you that I know truly that this kind of an event can be a catalyst, a spark for real change in communities. We've been following a story for the last year about a couple who showed up at last year's RuralX that I want to tell you about that in a few minutes as well. But we really are the shapers of this new rural that's emerging. But there's plenty of people who would say things are tough out here, right? And I think they're right. Some things are really tough. A lot of the communities that we all live in have had some hard times. They've either been slowly shrinking, disintegrating away, or they're growing a little too fast and we don't know how to manage that growth, and a whole host of other kinds of issues that rural communities are facing today. And we can pretend those things aren't true, or we can actually try to partner with the reality that is ours and see where we can go. And I don't have to tell you about what all those issues are, right? You can read them in the news. This is just from a week or so ago in the Sioux Falls paper about the shrinking population in rural communities. This was picked up by several other papers. You probably saw it. But here's the truth. More small towns are going to disappear in South Dakota and in this part of the country, right? Let's not pretend that that's not true. In fact, maybe some of us in this room live in one of those communities right now. And the rural that we knew, that 1955 painting of Main Street, that's never coming back. We're never going to be that again. So we can let go of that, or we can continue to be dragged along by this idea that we're going back to something that a lot of us would never want to go back to anyway for a whole bunch of reasons. But the thing is, whatever those circumstances are, whatever is really true about your community, what's difficult, what's tough there, we can choose to thrive anyway. We can choose to thrive. I didn't say grow, I said thrive. Now is our moment to be bold together. There's something happening, something emerging. I bet you can sense it too in this country. Something's happening in rural places. Something's happening about the conversation, the narrative around rural. In the big cities, on the coasts, and right here in the heartland of America where we live. These are all some stories I've pulled just in the last week or so about some of that new hope, that new kind of rural community that's emerging. So there's clues about what it'll look like. Lots of clues that we can point to that are pointing to something new, something that we can't quite describe yet, but that we know is coming, that we can sense and feel is here in this very moment. There's a new kind of rural emerging, evolving, showing up. It's different from the past. And it's us. We are it. We are shaping it. What does that new rural look like? Well, like I said, we don't really know exactly, but here are some clues that are pointing to what it looks like. I believe it's going to be the kind of place where we explore the spaces between us, where we're not afraid to sit down and trust each other enough to have the hard conversations, to talk about the thing that we don't want to talk about, to face the realities of our histories, the shadows and the bright spots, and continue to build the spaces that create community. I think they're the kinds of communities where we make thriving, being vibrant, more important than growing. We've had this obsession with growth for my whole lifetime, at least, in rural communities. And for my whole lifetime, the community I live in and many of the communities you live in have still been shrinking. Yet, all we talk about is how we need to grow. And it doesn't matter what size the community is. Every community I've ever been in South Dakota says, yeah, we're trying to grow. We're doing this so that we can grow, because we all need to get bigger. It doesn't matter if we're in a community of 500 people or 5,000 people or 50,000 people. Everybody thinks growth is the answer. I think the future of rural communities is a place where growth is not our obsession, where we're trying to make places and a community where we can thrive together, whoever's there. And to do that, I think those communities are going to be places where we get comfortable with not knowing the answers, not knowing what's coming next, not knowing exactly what to do or who needs to do it. We can't see the future so well because we can look backward less and less to tell us what the future is going to be like. So it's hard for us to look into that crystal ball. And we can be not knowers and step into conversations and step into projects and step into challenges and say, I don't know what to do, but let's find it together. Let's find that breakthrough solution instead of pretending we know the answer. I believe there are the kinds of communities where people will gather up all the different visions and stop pretending that there's any such thing as a shared vision, any such thing as this is the one thing we all want to create. Now, I want to make sure you just heard what I said. This is the guy who's the president of an organization that helps communities think about their vision for the future. There are many visions. Some of them are shared in a rural community. I believe the future rural communities are places where we can gather all those visions and just get started. Do something now. What can we agree to work on together instead of what can we agree we're trying to all create together? Because good luck. If you really believe that everybody in your community has the same vision, just because they've put some sticky dots on the wall, and I believe they're the kinds of places where we tell different stories. Our stories shape us. The shape of rural is our stories. And we can change the kinds of stories we're telling ourselves. Not to mention the stories we're telling everybody else. That comes later. That's less important. What really matters is what are we telling ourselves? What are we believing about ourselves and our communities and what's possible here in these places that we call home? What are we telling ourselves about who's in the way? What are we telling ourselves about who we're waiting for to come and save us? They're not coming. They're the kinds of communities where it's very clear that shaping that future is up to all of us. All of us in those communities. People who've been doing it with great intentions for a long time, people who may be just stepping into it, and people who have never felt like it was theirs to shape in the first place. Let me provoke you a little. I don't believe we need more leaders in our rural communities. I think the kind of leadership that we're used to is now obsolete. It's just not working anymore. It's not bad, and it never was good. It worked for a long time, and now we need something different. What are the clues that the old way, the way we've done it before, is becoming obsolete? Let me see if you've heard any of these before in your community. Where the heck is everyone? Why is nobody coming to this meeting? We've invited them. Why is nobody showing up for this committee that I just formed? Why is nobody fixing that clock tower? Why is the Lions Club down to like 5 guys? Right? Where the heck is everyone? They haven't left town, they just aren't showing up, right? And then we decide what's important. We do that sticky dot thing, and then we say, okay, great, here's the list of things to do. Now, whose job is this anyway? Who's supposed to do this? And it's crickets, right? That's not the city's job. That's not the development corp's job. It's not the chamber's job, right? We don't know whose job it is because we haven't empowered people to go do the things they want to do and create the things they want to create. Why won't they just show up? We've put an ad in the paper. We put it on Facebook. We even created an event. Why isn't everybody here? Right? Doesn't matter the size of the community, by the way. Doesn't matter at all. We're not meeting people where they are. We're not going to them and meeting them, going where their energy is with our invitations. We're expecting them to come to us in the way that we invite them. How about this one? Remember how it used to be? Remember when Main Street was full every Saturday night? Remember when we had street dances and 2,000 people showed up? Right? We're never going back. It's never going to be the same again. We have to look forward. But sometimes we get stuck looking backward in our old kind of leadership. Won't another plan just collect some more dust? Right? The answer is always, let's create a plan. Let's do some planning, right? Another thing, by the way, that Dakota Resources does. But there's a new way of going about that. The old way just isn't working for us anymore because what happens to that plan? Goes on the shelf. I was just in a meeting in a community. I don't know if the person is here. Paul and I were there. And he brought this plan from 25 years ago that their community had done and laid it down and said, look, it's all the same stuff that we just named. What are you doing with our dollars anyway? Anybody heard that one? If you're on an economic development corporation? Why can't you tell us? Where's that money going? Why should the city be funding economic development? This one is maybe the most brutal, the most poisonous for us. We didn't come here to talk about that. We had an agenda. We're here tonight to talk about this thing. Never mind that people showed up who have something else really important that they want to talk about in the community. Something that has been pushed away and pushed away and pushed away that we haven't addressed and we haven't talked about before. And again, we're not going to talk about it because we have this agenda that we decided on earlier, right? And then the one that drives me crazy, somebody should do this. Somebody should fix that sidewalk. Somebody should create this park. Somebody should paint a mural on that building, right? So if the old way, if the way of leading that we're used to is not really working for us anymore, then we need a better way. And it doesn't mean throwing away everything we know about leadership. It means taking the stuff that does work, including that and transcending it to become something a little different, something that will work better for us now. It won't work forever, but it's what we need in this moment, and I call those shapers. A new kind of leadership called community shaping. And it's not really new, but it's a new way for us to talk about it. Some of you were in a workshop this morning with my friend Tuesday, and you probably saw this 2 loops. You probably stood on 2 loops on the floor. This is the way that rural shapers look at their community. They understand that the old way of doing things, the old form of community is dying, and there's a new way that's emerging and evolving. And shapers know how to be in that space in between, to navigate that, to, in a sense, hospice that old system that isn't working for us anymore, and helping people move over to the new system. When we practice the old way of leadership, sometimes we get really stuck in that old system. We don't want to let go of that because it worked for us 20 years ago. We think it'll work for us today. Shapers also ask a whole lot of questions. They turn assumptions into questions. They turn agendas into questions. When we're leading the old way, we often show up with the answers. The answers are just that. They're the end of the conversation, right? They don't invite more conversation. They put an end to it. So shapers understand we have to get to the bottom of things. What's really causing the problems in our community? What's really getting in the way of this idea or this opportunity happening? It's at the bottom of an iceberg that is hard to see. When we think about leading in the old way, we end up focusing a lot on the things that are easy to see that are happening right in front of us. We focus more on projects than on the stories that are shaping the actions that we take. Shapers also learned that I can gain a whole lot of perspective by stepping into the shoes or looking through the eyes of a whole bunch of other people. When we lead the old way, sometimes we get some narrow vision because we think we've seen it all, we've seen enough, we know what to do next. We don't need more perspective. And I think shapers come into this work carrying the flag of purpose, right? I have passion for this thing, I'm willing to make commitment to do it. The old way of leading, sometimes we just make the list and say, here's what you should do, here's what you should work on. Instead of carrying that flag and saying, gather around, let's work on whatever you want to work on. How can I help? And that's what this shows, that shapers put themselves at the center, but not because they're going to direct or lead or be the boss of anything, but instead they're going to say, how can we help you do what you want to do? And how can we not make that a life sentence? So you can work on this thing for as long as you want to work on it and then let it go. It's either done or we've quit working on that and we're working on something else that's going to show up and we're going to support the heck out of those people who want to work on that thing. When we lead in the old way, often we say, we have the plan, we have the project, now come, help us do it. And finally, shapers know that they have to be able to bounce back and forth between the details of getting projects done and the big picture that people want to talk about. When we lead the old way, sometimes we get stuck up there in the big picture because we're so attached to it that we forget to get down into the details. Shapers also walk a path that crosses back and forth between creative space and putting systems in place that we can repeat over and over and over again. When we are leading the old way, sometimes we get stuck in one or the other of those circles. Shapers understand that there's 3 different ways to lead, to organize. There's the one that's most traditional, this top-down. There's sitting in a circle where everyone is equal. And there's a network where we're just connecting everyone and helping people do whatever they want to do. When we lead the old way, we tend to get stuck in just one of those models instead of knowing that all 3 of them are valuable to us as leaders in a community. Now, I want to really quickly talk about the first shaper I ever knew, or at least the person who I called a shaper for the first time, maybe. It's a man named Steve Metley, who's no longer with us, but was the planning director in Sioux Falls for about 30 years. It doesn't matter what community it is. I know saying, oh, the planning director from Sioux Falls might, get me in a little trouble at a rural conference, but it doesn't matter. What he did, what I saw him do, if you've been to downtown Sioux Falls and seen the transformation that has happened there over the last 15 or 20 years that's still unfolding, much of that can be pointed back to Steve, because what I saw him do was, as the city planning director, come to the table after table after table and say, how can we help? What can we do to help you do the thing you want to do to make this community stronger? So I decided to put Steve up there. And there's a bunch of shapers in this room. One who taught me even more than Steve is sitting right over here, Dr. Beto. I hope you'll get a chance to meet him before this is over. The epitome of a rural shaper, if I've ever seen one. Matt Ellman is here somewhere. Matt is doing some amazing community shaping in Rapid City around creating a space for creativity and entrepreneurship and community. I'm getting out of people's way. There's some more shapers in the room. Sean, would you wave or stand up? So, and Brian, are you here too? Yeah, Brian. Okay. Sean and Brian are from Tripp, South Dakota, just down the road. If you get a chance to go to Tripp before you go home, take a little field trip. How do you like that? go see what they're working on. They have had one heck of a year. A year ago, we met them at RuralX. They kind of showed up out of the blue and introduced themselves to us. We've followed them along. If you go to dakotaresources.org, you can read their story. But they have had some major battles in their community over different facilities and fits and starts, and they have an energetic crew that they are shaping in some amazing ways. So please ask Sean and Brian, because they're inspiring for all of us. So lastly, I want to say that I know this stuff is hard. This stuff seems impossible sometimes. I've been there in your shoes. I've been the one person who wakes up in the morning and is responsible for thinking about the future of my community. And that's quite a burden. Everything is your fault. There's nobody there to tell you what to do. You're supposed to have all the answers. I feel that pain. Being a shaper takes you out of that pain, or at least some of it, right? And puts you into a role of inviting other people to do whatever they want to do and just supporting them. And saying, what do you want to do and how can I help? Because sometimes we can think we're agreeing on something and we're really not, right? Sometimes we find out that things are even more complex than we first thought, that's normal. This is actually a map Paula and I worked with Economic Development Corporation earlier this year, and they kept telling us, it's just really complicated the way that all the things that we're working on and the things that we're in charge of and the different organizations, and we're like, yeah, we know, it's complicated everywhere. And finally we said, okay, let's map it. Well, they were right. And the thing is, it's pretty typical, right? It's pretty typical to try and map the things that you're a part of or connected to. But here's the thing. We don't have to do this alone anymore. We've focused a lot of resources and energy in the last year or two at Dakota Resources to build a community learning network. We realized that going out there to you and helping you in your communities wasn't enough. We needed to connect you with each other because you're so much smarter when you're all together. You're so much better equipped when you can share with each other what's working and what's not, when you can teach each other. We're all in this together out here. I hope you'll join me in shaping rural. I'm really excited to be in a position where I get to go around and talk about this for the next, we'll see, maybe 20 years, huh? Real quickly, right now at ruralshapers.com, you can download these slides. You can get all the links to all the articles that I referenced if you want to go look at those. You can also download a one-page PDF of the opening that we read earlier when we started RuralX. And thanks to Heidi Martilla-Lozier for putting that together for us yesterday in a pinch. Thank you. I took more time than I was supposed to, so I don't think we have time for questions, but I would love to talk with all of you over the next 28 hours. Thank you very much for being here.